Good evening, all. I, on behalf of NISSMAT, am Pawanjit Ahluwalia, and I'll be conducting the panel discussion. And for the panel discussion, the subject today is nationalism. Is it a boon or a curse? I have three panelists with me: Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, Major General Deepak Mehta, and Mr. Singh, who is the president of NISSMAT. I will introduce each of the panelists in a minute. Firstly, Major General Deepak Mehta is an alumnus of the National Defense Academy and the Indian Military Academy. He served in Arunachal Pradesh, Jammu Kashmir, and in all terrains of the country. He's been a battalion commander, a mountain brigade commander, and a divisional commander. He's been an instructor at the Indian Military Academy and the Army War College. Mr. Singh is a very illustrious police officer. He served the Indian police in various capacities throughout the country. He raised the Rapid Action Force, and he was also its first chief. He also raised the Internal Security Academy in Mount Abu, Rajasthan. He's had several decorations during his illustrious career. Post-retirement, he's been a consultant with the Tatas, and he was also the chairman of the Technical Committee of Quality Control of India that developed the standards for the rating of the private security companies. He was also involved in developing the curriculum of private security guards training under the Security Sector Skill Council. He was the head of the committee which designed and worked out national occupation standards for the firefighters in India. The President of India in 2009 recognized his services to the country post-retirement and awarded him the Security Personality of the Year award. He currently advises the Asian Professional Security Association and is also the Honorary Director General of the Central Association of Private Security Industry and the Association of Private Detectives and Investigators. His face is well known on the Indian television scene, and he is frequently called to share his views on various subjects connected to homeland security on national events. General Prakash Menon. He is presently the Director Strategic Studies Program, Takshila Institution, Bangalore. He is the adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, and Professor Emeritus, Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore. He is the author of the Strategy Trap, India and Pakistan under the Nuclear Shadow, and also is a co-author of the Non-Alignment 2.0. He retired from the Army in October of 2011, but continued in the government as a military advisor and secretary to the Government of India in the National Security Council Secretariat. He was also the officer on special duties at the NSCS from March of 15 to March of 2017. He served in the Indian Army for nearly 40 years and has had extensive operational experience as a company commander on the Siachen Glacier and the line of control. He's also commanded a battalion, brigade, and a division in counter-insurgency areas in central, north, and south Kashmir. He was commandant of the National Defense College in New Delhi from 2009 to 2010. He has been awarded a PhD from Madras University for his thesis, Limited War and Nuclear Deterrence in the Indo-Pak Context. He was appointed by the Union Cabinet as part of an expert group for the creation of Indian National Defense University. He was the coordinator for the Naresh Chandra Committee that reviewed the national security system. In 2014, he was visiting fellow at the Nanyang Technology Institute in Singapore. I would now request each panelist, I'll give them 2 minutes to speak on the subject. Nationalism, is it a boon or a curse? I start with you, General Deepak Mehta.
As far as the nationalism is concerned, there are various facets of nationalism. They are civic, ethnic, expansionist, which actually is affecting India very adversely, cultural, ideological, and disposition. As far as our nationalism is concerned, prior to independence, it was the nationalist movement to bring independence to the country. After this, during the 65 and 71 war, it was the political dispensation which took advantage of it because of the neighbors that we have in the north and the west, that's China and Pakistan, and that played a major role in terms of nationalism. But since mid-80s, there has been a little decline of nationalism because of ethnic disputes or religious disputes between the various groups. As far as is it a positive or is it a negative or positive? I think it's both sides. As far as negative thing is concerned, it amounts to getting into a dispute various communities, which is now coming up. As the positivity is concerned, it is dependent on the national ethos. What are the positives or the ingredients of positive and negative nationalism? As far as the positive is concerned, it promotes a sense of identity, it unites the people and promotes pride. And the negativity, it leads to conflict, which is a very major issue, infringes on the rights of the others, and also causes fear. Now, as far as we are concerned in India, there are various groups which are forming in their own, which to a certain extent bring in certain amount of negativity. For example, in Punjab, it's a ceremony, Akali Dal, which wants to have creation of Sikh identity in Punjab. You have Shiv Sena in Maharashtra. You have Assam Gana Parishad in Assam. You have DK and ADMK and MDMK in Tamil Nadu, and the BSP, which is actually caste-based politics. So as far as
Deepak, your time is.
This is one definite requirement to bring in certain amount of national ethos within all the parties that's connecting everyone together, inculcate trust amongst the communities, toleration and not antagonism, which is a basic requirement. And society now wants to be governed by a rational and reasonable governance.
Deepak, your time is up. I'll now move on to the next panelist, and we'll come back to you again.
Okay.
Mr. Sipal Singh, your comments, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Some of the practical examples have been given about nationalism and whether the Boon occurs by General Deepak. I'll try to go into the total holistic point of view as to why nationalism and what is patriotism and how there's a conflict. Normally, the term nationalism is used to describe two phenomena. One, it is an attitude that the members of a nation state may have so as to care, so as to care about their national identity. And the second part of it is that the actions that the members of a nation state take when seeking to achieve or sustain this sort of self-determination, or they call it nationality. Now, the problem is nationalism is often referred to a state or a political entity which have some sovereignty. For example, the natives of America may be considered as an ethnic unity, but they do not have a state. They do not possess the requisite political authority. Hence, they are not supposed to be having a nationalism within themselves or outside in America. Now, nationalism, how it came into focus. Nationalism came into focus only about, at the forefront, I would say, about 3 decades back, when the trouble started in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia and some states in former Soviet republics. Now, the term nationalism, then I told you, basically encompasses 2 phenomena, that is the attitude and the action. Now, the degree of nationalistic fervor in such cases can be very high. And sometimes this fervor, this political unity for the country considered by these nationalists belonging to only one ethnic, one culture, one religious group is considered very high. Now, the danger or the curse of nationalism starts here, because when they feel with the fervor that our culture, our ethnic unity, our religion is more important for nationalism, then the problems are. Now, let us consider the 2 sides of the national coin.
So
on the first side, identification and cohesion within an ethnic opportunity and the intergroup cooperation. And the second is the rivalry with other groups and trying to curb the other groups. Thank you.
General Menon, your comments, please.
I think the first we must recognize that the word nationalism relates to an imagined common identity, an identity that can be based on diverse factors like language, culture, geography, religion, et al. So it is after the establishment of the nation-state system in 1648 by the Treaty of Westphalia that nations as they exist today is part of the international system. And those nations are in principle supposed to be to enjoy sovereignty. Whether it is a curse or whether it is good, I think we must understand that this imagined identity, which brings people into a collective under a national flag, can invoke a spirit which can be liberal, accommodative of others, or it can be illiberal, that your identity and your nationalism is about othering, about treating others as your enemy, and therefore you have this illiberal sense of nationalism which is based on religion and very narrow vectors. So the point is that it can be used for the good, and it is necessary, because the nation states is ultimately the one which can protect its citizens. That is why they are nation states. That's why people actually have the common identity and expect that the nation state will protect them. And it's required in the international system. So the question is not of choice. The question is, what do you make of the nationalism in terms of the spirit, and where can it be directed? In an illiberal atmosphere where the global system today finds itself, illiberal nationalism is the fashion of the day. Most of the nations have invoked the other as the enemy and then use emotions generated by it to direct it against us, often done by politicians with might also be harboring very narrow political interests. So they can hijack it for their own in the name of protecting people or the nation from the other. A liberal democracy would be accommodative, would actually like to have open trade, would like to have larger realm of relationships, and therefore, although it has a national identity, it can only be solved by cooperation at the international level, especially when global problems like climate change or nuclear weapons needs international cooperation. So it all depends upon how the politicians of that country who are ruling it are actually taking it and what they are using it for. That makes it a curse, or it could actually be beneficial to all.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Now, nationalism is based on emotions that develop fanaticism and also produces prejudices. Destruction of religious places, would you term it as nationalism? Deepak, your views.
No, it is not. As a matter of fact, it is against the unity of a national ethos. Destruction of, it's a democracy. Everyone has the right to go for their own religion. Destruction of religious places is not a part of nationalism. As a matter of fact, that has led into a faction, religious factions, which are dividing the population. So I think it's a wrong thing for destruction of any religious place, for that matter.
No, but is it nationalism? Is it nationalism that destroys the religious places?
No, it is not. It is not. It is. I will take it as this. It's basically fundamentalist by design, and it's not nationalism at all. It is actually expansionist, which is causing radical elements in the nation.
Deepak, nationalism is a feeling of belongingness to one nation. It is a feeling of oneness, togetherness, characterized by common culture.
Yes.
Right, Sipal sir, what is your view on the subject? The destruction of religious places. Is it nationalism?
I totally agree with General Deepak. No, nationalism's cynical misuse and curbing dissent and also trying to curb the religious freedoms of others are devaluate everyday's participation of the people in their own social ethos and social functions. They are not exactly nationalism. Close observation reveals there is a vital difference between the two. They are trying to misuse the word nationalism to synchronize it with patriotism. Actually, it is not patriotic. According to dictionary meaning, patriotism is quite simple. Love for one's country, and that country includes everywhere. Is it one religious place or that religious place or this religious place? So love for the country is patriotism. But they are hijacking the word patriotism and using the word nationalism so as to create that conflict within the society, which is exactly against patriotism. I'd like to say, if you permit me, one minute more. For example, the Balakot highlights the 2 points, the incident of Balakot. Should this event, of course, I'm not going into details whether the event was correct or not. Should this event evoke a sense of patriotism? Or must they provide a sort of nationalistic fervor to it for their political ends? That is the point to be considered. Patriotism is considered a fulsome, not necessarily demonstrative. Nationalism, in terms of the total meaning today, is exuberant and overt reaction, which is very, very dangerous. And that nationalism can be misused by those who wish to benefit from them. And that hyper-nationalism, I will call it, can be artificially stimulated, whipped up to serve some ulterior purpose and destroy the religious places. In the hands of politicians, such a nationalism has become a really lethal weapon.
Prakash, what are your views on the subject?
I slightly disagree with the idea that the destruction of religious places is not nationalism. You know, to say it is not nationalism, I disagree. Let me explain why I say that. To imagine that nationalism is only a good thing and not a bad thing is, firstly, I think that should be something which we need to disabuse of. Nationalism is about the creation of a collective spirit under a national flag and directing that spirit in the name of interests of that country. That is what politicians do. That is what political leaders are supposed to do. So when, let's say, the destruction of the Ayodhya Mandir, what was the spirit which was invoked? The spirit which was invoked was based on the common identity, which is part of India's nationalistic setup of the Hindu majoritarian identity, weaved into a story of historic wrongs which you wanted to rectify in today's age, and that is how that temple was destroyed. But the spirit which was used, which was provoked, created, and othered, and the minority was the Muslim minority, the othering was still the use of nationalism. You can't say this is not nationalism, this is the use of nationalism. It can be used against minorities and continues to be used against minorities even today, because that is the one which is caused in today's, this thing has caught India's larger majoritarian sentiment that hum Hindu hai. We are the majority. And I think we have given away too much in history to the minorities. We need to be given as much and we're going to get it back. Now, this is the common identity which you identify people under this religious flag, use it for national purposes, and this is how the negative aspects and the curse of nationalism, which is now actually sweeping across India. So nationalism, in the sense as it is practiced today in India and probably in more parts of the world, is about the hijacking of nationalism into an arena which actually is directed against the other. The other can be based on an enemy nation, or it can be based on a religious minority within the nation, and so on. So I would say that this is illiberal nationalism in action.
Deepak, any comments you have?
I beg to differ with you to a certain extent. India is a democracy with, it's a secular democracy. Every religion has a right to follow their religion, what they do. Yes, to invoke what history has done in the past, that's a different thing. But causing a rift between the communities. Now, this rift between, say, Hindus and the Islamic people, now this is or go down south. If you want to bring out a joint sort of unity in the nation, we say Hindi is a national language. South is not accepting it. They say, sorry, we have our own language. So you see, we have to get a common matrix for unity.
Mr. Sipal Singh, any comments?
Yes, I think partially General Menon has agreed, but he says that this is not exactly nationalism and they are misusing. That's exactly. I also feel, and everyone feels, that this, you may not call it nationalism, hyper nationalism, necessarily demonstrative nationalism, exuberant nationalism, overt nationalism. That is where the problem comes. Danger is that nationalism can be misused. This sort of interpretation of nationalism can be misused by those who wish to benefit. My point is that this sort of hyper nationalism, I will use the word, he says, General said this is a sort of illegal or irrelevant or illiberal nationalism. I have used the word hyper nationalism. This can be artificial, so whipped up as to serve some ulterior motives of some parties, some political parties or some religion. And the hands of such politicians who do not worry as such for the entire nation, but sometimes they worry about some particular ethnic group, some particular religion. I'm not saying ethnic group also. In that such cases, it is a very, very wrong weapon and very dangerous weapon and very lethal weapon to be used. So this sort of hyper nationalism is very dangerous.
See, by definition, if it is an imagined identity, a common identity, whether that is used for good or bad does not mean that it is not nationalism. That's the point which I want to make.
No, certainly not. I have used the word hyper nationalism. Nationalism, still I am using the word. I have never said it is not nationalism.
Okay.
I am saying this sort of demonstrative nationalism is not good for the country.
Okay, if I were to make a statement, I love my country, I love my India, am I being patriotic or am I being nationalistic?
You see, I was coming into that. As far as security forces are concerned, there is no caste, there is no creed. There's nationalism, they are patriotic, they are devoted to a national cause. It is the fringe elements which are causing the rift. And I can talk for myself. I have served with both the communities while in service. There was never a doubt on the nationalism in them. But it is what Prakash is mentioning and what Mr. Sipal is mentioning, is that it is the politics. It is the power of some people who are creating all the rift. So there is a problem there.
So when I make a statement, I love my country, I love my India, am I being patriotic or am I being nationalistic? Mr. Sipal Singh.
Absolutely, you are patriotic. But this patriotism, if you say, I love my country, hence I have been able to achieve this thing as a Balakot incident. Since I love my country, the differentiation comes when this sort of nationalism is synchronized with patriotism. When you synchronize this sort of expansionist nationalism with patriotism, then the danger comes. I love my country is the worst. That is a full sum. I love my country, I love my nation. This is a full sum meaning. You are love my country is a patriotic because a full sum. You are not harming anyone. My point is the liberal nationalism in the form of nationalism, which affirms that all the states, all the religions can promote and imbibe a sense of shared humanism, a sense of nationality is very good. That liberal nationalism is required. Not the nationalism which should be used for just not patriotism, we should use hijacking into exaggerated nationalism to harm others.
My question was, when I use the word, I love my country, I love my India, am I being nationalistic or am I being patriotic? Prakash, what would you say?
The simple answer is that's a typical listing of patriotism, because that is an individual sentiment about what you feel about the country. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. So you see, the positive outcomes of nationalism are which promotes a sense of identity, unites people, promotes pride, and the negative outcomes are leads to conflict with others, infringes on rights of others, creates xenophobia, that fear that someone will take over. So when I ask the question of the destruction of religious places, which point of these comes into play?
Lisa, you are asking the same question in an indirect way. As far as I am concerned, I am very clear. I have told you that the dichotomy created by this sort of narrow nationalism, the dichotomy which has been created by this sort of narrow nationalism, a parochial nationalism, I use the word, this is no good. The humanitarian values, if there are, actually there should be humanitarian values in any nationalist system. That is good. But you try to use the humanitarian values of patriotism towards aggressive nationalism. That is not good. So therefore, you are asking the same question indirectly.
So which of the two is better? It is good to be a
Yes, sir.
nationalistic or it is good to be a patriot?
Sir?
They are not the same. They are not the same. They are probably two sides of two different sides of the coin, but you can't. They are not the same. This is an individual sentiment about loving a political entity you belong to. That is patriotism. That is very clear. Nationalism is a much larger entity which describes the collective, the imagined identity under which you have collected, because after all, the fundamental nations are not required if the world was not anarchic in its nature, because nations are the only ones are able to protect their citizens. So people individually have no choice. They have to be under the protection of somebody. So nations today that's the nation state, is that entity which is supposed to look after the interests of this thing. So therefore, when the nation state protect you, the national interests which are generated by that is what nationalism is supposed to develop and protect. Patriotism is purely a sentiment about wanting to love your country, for which you would be willing to sacrifice. So you can't say that this is different from the other. They mesh with each other, but they are still different.
Deepak, your views on the subject?
I feel that by and large, people are nationalistic, but politics divides them. One of the definitions of nationalism is political program that sees the creation of a sovereign state given by ethnic national leader. Now, everyone wants to become the damn leader. Now, when you hear the leaders speak on the media, they talk of the nation as a whole. But when they come to various political parties or to the religious denomination, they have a different voice altogether. So there's a dichotomy in the two of both these things.
See, when the emotion of hate is generated by political leaders and directed to what they have described as the enemy, and that is actually what is happening to the minorities in India.
That's right.
The Muslim minority, that is using nationalism, the majoritarian nationalism, to actually sort out people who are whose hate is directed at. You do the same thing against another country like China or Pakistan, which tries to actually be aggressive against us. You generate the spirit which is directed against them. So the question really is, neither the thing about both these issues are that nationalism can be good and can be bad. It depends upon what the political leaders want, which game are they playing, and for whose interests are they playing for.
A point was raised by one of you about the armed forces. The armed forces are essential and they're mandated to be apolitical. They are essentially apolitical and they're mandated to be apolitical. Their sacrifices is not the monopoly of anyone. Their sacrifices and their valor is not the monopoly of any particular political party. To make them as accessory to party politics, in fact, helps to stroke nationalism in a different manner. But in an unpatriotic act, while patriotism is a continuous, ultra-nationalism is not a continuous process. It needs demonstrative process. There's also the danger that if an unchecked sort of demonstrative process is highlighted, there may be some areas which are not to be invoked or not to be entered into by the politician. Those areas or those sectors may get affected. There's also danger that it unchecked, this heightened and demonstrative nationalism may degenerate into some sort of jingoism, into some sort of xenophobia. That may compromise at some stage. I'm not saying ASI extremism, I would definitely say I'm not one of those pseudo-secularism who says, no, nothing should happen. If there is terrorism, you have to deal in Punjab. That's not the question. The question is how the platform is used. For what purpose the platform is used. Neither be a pseudo-secularist, nor be a vocal nationalist. My point only has been, and that is what most of us have agreed, that yes, patriotism is there, but don't use the platform of patriotism to have a demonstrative nationalism to harm others or to check others or to check the liberties of others. There it becomes a curse. Whether nationalism is a boon, there's no doubt, because as you really pointed out very nicely, that we need to have national entity for our country. It is a boon. But when it goes in their demonstrative form, unchecked, then it becomes a curse. That is my point.
I say a few words. As far as I feel very strongly that there is a definite requirement to enhance the unity. And to get the unity, you have to place the nation first, and not the political parties and the inimical groups which are operating. Inculcate trust amongst various people and of the communities, and also have toleration to what is happening in their society, and give the governance, be it a central government or the state government, should have a rational approach towards the rights of the people. And that's what I feel very strongly as far as the nationalism is concerned.
See, what should be is actually to be confined within the realm of the Constitution of India, which is the guiding legal framework which we have, under which we have said this is the republic, we are the citizens of this republic, and come together. So the point at issue is, as long as the spirit of nationalism is being used within the principles of the Constitution, which recognizes the diversity of India, as long as that is maintained, it is okay. But the problem with the democracy is, and this is what the problem is actually, that the democratic functioning is based on an electoral system which depends upon a first past the post system, and whoever wins forms the government. So the party in power today have been elected by the people of this country, and they seem to be increasing that power. They dominate the Lok Sabha, many other states. They are the ones who actually is carrying out these. The problem with the Indian state right now and their inability to stop politicians from misusing nationalism is the erosion of other institutions which are supposed to actually be the checks and balances between the government in power
And
the judiciary, and all those institutions are actually being...
this. I just want to ask another question. Does nationalism promote in the area of sports? How does nationalism work?
Yes, it does.
How does it work? It does, but how does it work? How does it edge you on? How does it gear people up? What is your opinion, Deepak? How does nationalism impact sports?
Whenever any sports event takes place internationally, usually, let's say, take cricket, which is going on now, the whole nation is together. Everyone talking of Virat Kohli and other players. Even in the international games, when we go for Olympics or the national, these Asian games or whatever the games are, the nation is together. I have not seen anyone talking ill against those people who are taking part in the games. It's a very good binding factor at the nationalism.
Prakash, what would you say?
I would completely agree. I mean, this is one of the greatest benefits of of nationalism, and which is witnessed so commonly because it is outside the realm of politics. The only politics which prevail in sports in our country is about the selection of our players. But despite all that, the very fact that the Indian is so proud to firstly wanting, there are a lot of huge population wanting to wear that jersey with India written at the back, and the support that they enjoy because they play for the rest of us. And I think nothing better than any of the international cricket matches which we watch, as Deepak said. So I think there should be more and more international sports, and it will generate the correct spirit because you're playing a sport by a common set of rules. You might be a small country, the rules are the same for everybody, and it's got a common platform. And I think that makes this competition, it brings out the correct spirits, everybody is equalized.
Mr. Sipal Singh, what would you think of the sports and nationalism?
See, I have already given my view. So long nationalism is used for nation as an entity, nation as an entity. But nationalism, if it's used as a jumping board, let us say that sports is very good. But if somebody claims that sports is good because of my presence, this government presence or that government presence, that is not nationalism. Despite the number of dark side of nationalism, like I have said, division of the people into various nationalities or groups, we still can have rays of bright side on nationalism if you consider the sports era. There's a brighter side. Everyone goes with it. So there's a brighter side of nationalism. I've never said that nationalism is absolutely dark. So there are rays of hope, the brighter side, and sports provides the brighter side of hope. I'll add one more sentence if you ask me. That pseudo-intellectual and pseudo-secularist, they sometimes say it's not correct to curb terrorism. In one of the forums, Integrated Unity, Gill, KPS Gill, who was a main person who tried to defeat terrorism, he says, I don't believe, and everyone should not believe, that it is sort of pseudo-secularism, pseudo-intellectualism. That is there, where the nation is being affected. Yes, you come forward, you try to curb it with a strong hand. But when the nation is not, you only want to use that word nationalism for some parties or some leaders' own benefit, then it is dangerous. Otherwise, sports is, if you use everyone, sports is very good. It's very good. It is a very good ray of hope for all of us.
How do shared beliefs and a way of life create a common bond which promotes nationalism?
Yes, absolutely. The question is, I said, General Menon pointed out right in the beginning, there are two sides of it. He said, nation as an entity, yes, we have to, our rights, our sovereign rights, nation has to protect it. So all along, I think it is possible when you try to give fillip to such activities in common life, that all right, we are with our nation, we want to protect the sovereignty of the state, but the sovereignty of the state should not be at the cost of curbing dissent. Dissent is allowed in any liberal democracy. And I mentioned once earlier also, unfortunately, our constitution has laid down certain principles, guiding principle, directive principle, which are not somehow or other, they are not legally cannot be enforced. But then our moral values should be there, that we should consider of those directive principles of constitution to be imbibed in us for all social good. The directive principles are not legally possible. You cannot go to court and not legally, you cannot enforce them legally. But we should create a culture that these directive principles of the Constitution, in addition to the Constitution, which itself lays down everything, the directive principles of the Constitution must be imbibed in all of us to be real nationalists and to be for the cause of humanity as such.
Prakash, what would you say? A shared past connects people as a group. The historical past of a community connects people in a group. And that also raises the need for nationalism.
See, when I said that nationalism is an imagined identity which can be weaved by the thread of language, culture, historical past, and so on, because common historical experiences unite people, especially if they're geographically proximate. And therefore, these are strong bonds which bring people together. And eventually, they feel that that unity will hopefully be able to protect their individual identity to the creation of a collective identity called nationalism, based on nationalism. That's what it is. So I think that a shared past is an absolute necessity for the creation of a national spirit.
Prakash, I fully agree with you. But what is coming out now is that certain aspects of history have not been given adequate weightage or not been addressed adequately. I think they need to do that, for example, which is being done. And that will bring a certain amount of nationalism within the country. And secondly, as far as the nation is concerned, I think certain aspects which built nationalism is one is the NCC, young children, right from the time of they join the schools and go to the colleges, they get a feeling of unity, they get the feeling of nationalism. Same is the case with the Sainik school. The percentage of students going to NDA from Sainik school is not more than 25%. But what they learn in these institutions I think should carry them far ahead.
You know, I think one of the point I think which you have raised here is the fact is that the politicians are also in the business of rewriting and reinventing history to fit the narrative which they want to push about othering, that they can direct the hate because changing the interpretation of history and therefore directing it against the other, which is presently what is happening in our country, that history is being rewritten to suit certain ideological postures which they want to adopt. And that
I fully agree with you, sir.
Is a problem.
I think in the in the start of discussion, right in the beginning, in my opening, I said this thing. To have an attitude of nationalism, emotion of nationalism, for the sake of your own, guarding your own sovereignty is a very good idea. But the actions which are taken under the garb of nationalism, they are not actually promoting nationalism, they are somehow or other destroying nationalism, because this rewriting of the history, as it says. In that term, in a few years' time, you will like to take out the time capsule also, which is already buried in earth, and you will try to put other time capsule in there. I mean, you want to put certain things which suit a particular political party or particular religious group. That is not nationalism at all. And neither that is patriotism. That is, of course, a very narrow sense of nationalism, I would call. So I had already in the opening said there's two things. One is attitude. Yes, the attitude of the members of any nation, that they care about their country, they care about the identity of country, they care about the members of its nation. Very good. That is called nationalism. But when you say that nationalism is demonstrative, all right, the action which I am taking, this action for nationalism, that actions part is going wrong. And that action are somehow damaging actually the term nationalism. Therefore, there when the actions are taken, there the curse come. The boon is there.
Tell me something. So now you see, when India was under the British rule, and we had a lot of nationalistic movements coming up, was economic exploitation of the people of our country a reason for the rise of nationalism? Prakash, your views.
No, the freedom movement is actually a good example of India's nationalism when Indians came together to expel the British from the country. I mean, that's why Indians came together. They had a common purpose, and that purpose was derived from the fact that these people had colonized us, which means they not only economically exploited us, in all spheres, they were our rulers, they were foreigners, and they had to be moved out. So it is through nationalism, by invoking the idea of India as a common imagined identity, which of course, when the partition came, that India, which was initially imagined, had to be broken up. That's a different part of the story. So it is not only the economic exploitation, it was the larger fact that we were ruled by foreigners.
Now, I have one, before we wind up, we just want to have a little discussion on what is the role of the press in promoting nationalism or destroying nationalism?
Tell me, which press is an independent press? They have their own agendas. Some have agendas on industrial hold-ups. Some have agendas with the political hold. And yes, they have a very major role if they bring in about unity with the various other groups rather than causing split amongst them.
Prakash, if you were to just combine three elements: the press, the transport system, and the communications, what is the impact of these three elements in promoting or destroying nationalism?
Firstly, we must understand that the press is under capture by ideological forces who are using patriotism as an instrument for majoritarian nationalism. That is the process which is on. And they have strangled India's press to a very large extent. And therefore, what is happening is that what the three factors, which is this thing, and the enablement of information to travel at great speeds to large amount of population, we can pollute the mind of a vast majority. And that minds are being polluted today significantly. And obviously, it has been reflected in the election results which are there. So the press, as the fourth leg of independent India, has lost much of its independence, and today is an instrument of the party and the government in power. That is the sad state of affairs that we are.
Mr. Sipal Singh, your comments on this subject.
Yes. About the press, I think the lesser said, the better today. The press is both a state. They say that they can change the government anywhere. They can do anything. But a choked press, a repressive press, or a bought press, either a choked, repressive, or a purchased press, they cannot do anything either to create a national fervor or to have a patriotism. So I feel this is absolutely right when General Menon has said that the press today is behaving as if it is one of the instruments in the hands of a government. That is not going to create that sort of nationalism or humanitarian nationalism or patriotism.
Okay, I just go around one more time for last closing comments. Deepak, I start with you. Your closing comments. Whether nationalism is a boon or a curse.
I think people are nationalists. There is no denying. As long as they're not exploited by political parties and by the fringe elements. People are by and large nationalists. They have patriotism, and as long as they're not exploited.
Mr. Sipal Singh, your comments.
I have a
Closing
feeling that
comments.
unity among diversity and focus on the values, humanitarian values, should be the main criteria of any nationalist. And the dichotomy which has been created now and the parochial national sentiments which are being whipped up, that is totally against the humanitarian values of nationalism. So I feel the best course is that this nationalism should be promoted, keeping in view the fact that it is not to be used for diversification, but only for unity and humanitarian values.
Prakash, your closing comments.
In my view, what we are witnessing in contemporary times is the utilization of nationalism in its negative sense to develop hate and direct it against minorities based on an ideological notion that this is a Hindu India and a majoritarian country. And that is the tragedy in which we find ourselves.
And thank you all on behalf of NISSMAT. I thank General Deepak Mehta, Mr. Sipal Singh, and Prakash Menon for a very enlightened discussion today. Thank you very much.